Have you ever opened your Bible to the Gospel of Luke and noticed the gap? It is the single largest, most glaring plot hole in the history of literature. And yet, for 2,000 years, the institutional church has convinced billions of people to simply ignore it, to pretend it doesn't exist. Here is the official timeline that you have been taught since Sunday school. We see Jesus born in Bethlehem under the star. We see him as an infant, fleeing to Egypt to escape the wrath of King Herod. And then we see him one last time, at the age of 12, astounding the teachers and priests in the Temple of Jerusalem with his precocious wisdom. And then, darkness, silence. The screen goes black. For the next 18 years, the Bible says absolutely nothing, from the age of 12 to the age of 30. The life of the most important figure in human history is a complete, total blank page. 18 years, that is nearly 2 decades. Think about your own life. Think about the difference between who you were at 12 years old and who you were at 30. It is the time when a boy becomes a man. It is the time when a student becomes a master. It is the formative period where wisdom is gained, where worldview is shaped, where character is forged, and where destiny is decided. And we are expected to believe that during this entire time, the Son of God did nothing? We are told he stayed in the tiny, dusty, irrelevant village of Nazareth. We are told he worked quietly as a humble carpenter, building tables and chairs, fixing roofs, sweeping sawdust, simply waiting for the clock to strike 30 so he could begin his ministry. But does that story really make sense to you? Does it resonate with the Jesus you see in the Gospels? Does it make sense that a soul so radiant, a mind so brilliant that he could debate the high priests at 12 years old, would simply sit still, intellectually and spiritually dormant, for 2 decades? Does it make sense that a man whose teachings would later bridge East and West, who would speak of concepts that sound like reincarnation, of the law of karma, reap what you sow, of the kingdom within, would learn all of that in a carpenter's shop in rural Galilee? Or is it possible that the silence is not empty? Is it possible that the silence is an edit? What if those 18 years were not uneventful? What if they were the most active, the most dangerous, the most adventurous, and the most transformative years of his life? What if Jesus didn't stay in Nazareth? What if he left? What if he joined the caravans of the Silk Road? What if he traveled to the great centers of wisdom of the ancient world, to the mystery schools of Egypt, to the Druids of mist-covered Britain, and, most controversially of all, to the temples of India and the monasteries of Tibet? This is the theory of the lost years, and for centuries, the Vatican and the institutional church have labeled it a myth. They have mocked it, they have called it heresy. They have suppressed anyone who dared to ask the question. Why? Why are they so afraid of a traveling Jesus? Because if Jesus traveled, if he studied, if he sat at the feet of other masters, then he was a student before he was a master. And if he learned his wisdom from pagan sources, from Buddhists, from Hindus, from Egyptian priests, then the church loses its monopoly on the truth. It means that Christianity is not a unique, isolated revelation that dropped from the sky. It means it is a synthesis, a bridge between the great wisdom traditions of the world. It means that Jesus was not just the King of the Jews, he was a citizen of the world. This is the truth they cannot allow you to know. They need a Jesus who is unique, a Jesus who received everything directly from the Father, fully formed, without human effort. They cannot handle a Jesus who walked the Silk Road, a Jesus who meditated in the Himalayas, a Jesus who was known by other names in other lands, names like Saint Issa. But the evidence is there. It is not in the Bible. It was removed from the Bible, but it is hidden in ancient scrolls, locked away in Himalayan monasteries. It is hidden in the local legends of Glastonbury, England. It is hidden in the accusations of the Jewish Talmud, which calls him a sorcerer from Egypt. And, if you have the ears to hear, it is hidden in the very words of Jesus himself, Words that sound suspiciously like the teachings of a Buddha who lived 500 years before him. The Bible says nothing, but history whispers. And today, we are going to listen to those whispers. We are going to retrace the footsteps of the forbidden journey. We are going to follow the trail from Galilee to the Ganges, from the pyramids to Stonehenge. We are going to find out where he went, who he met, and what he learned that made him so dangerous to Rome that they had to erase 18 years of his life to keep you from following his path. If the Bible is silent, where do we look for the missing pages? We must look to the lands that the Roman Empire could not control. We must look to the East. In 1887, a Russian aristocrat and war correspondent named Nicholas Notovich was traveling through the Himalayas in the region of Ladakh, often called Little Tibet. While riding his horse near the ancient Hemis monastery, he fell and broke his leg. The monks took him in and treated him. During his recovery, the head lama of the monastery told Notovich a story that sounded impossible. He spoke of a great prophet who had visited their land nearly 2,000 years ago, a prophet they called Saint Issa. Notovich was intrigued. He asked if there were any records of this man. The lama disappeared into the monastery's secret library and returned with 2 massive, dust-covered books bound in yellow silk. They were ancient Tibetan scrolls, translations of even older chronicles from India. As the lama read the verses to Notovich, the Russian realized he was not hearing the story of a Buddhist monk. He was hearing the missing biography of Jesus Christ. The scrolls described a child named Issa, born in Israel to poor parents. At the age of 13, the exact age the Bible goes silent, Issa secretly left his father's house. Why? The text says he left to avoid an arranged marriage and to perfect himself in the divine word. He joined a merchant caravan and traveled along the Silk Road to India. The scrolls detail his journey with stunning precision. They say he arrived in the region of Sind. He was welcomed by the Jain monks, who taught him the sanctity of all life. He then traveled to Jagannath, Rajgir, and Benares, the holy cities of the Hindus. There, he spent 6 years studying the Vedas, the ancient scriptures of India. He learned the art of healing. He learned the mastery of the breath. He learned how to cast out demons. But here is where the story connects to the Gnostic Jesus we know. Issa did not just learn, he rebelled. The Hindu priests, the Brahmins, tried to teach Issa their caste system. They told him that the lower classes, the Sudras, were forbidden from hearing the Vedas. They told him that God only loved the elites. Issa refused to accept this. Just as he would later defy the Pharisees in Jerusalem, he defied the Brahmins in India. The scrolls record his words. God the Father makes no difference between his children. All are equally dear to him. He began to teach the forbidden knowledge to the lower castes. He broke the laws of the religious establishment. The priests plotted to kill him, but warned by his loyal followers, Issa escaped into the night. He fled higher, into the mountains, into the Himalayas, and into the land of the Buddhists. This is the lost chapter. It explains where Jesus learned his gnosis. It explains why his teachings sound so different from the strict laws of the Old Testament. He was not just a Jewish carpenter. He was a student of the universal wisdom of the East. When Notovich returned to Europe and published his findings in a book called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, it caused a sensation. But it also attracted the attention of a powerful enemy, the Vatican. They did not want this story told. They called Notovich a fraud. They tried to destroy his reputation. Why? Because a Jesus who studied in India is a Jesus who cannot be owned by Rome. According to the scrolls found in the Hemis monastery, the young Jesus, known as Issa, arrived in India at the age of 14. He did not go there as a tourist. He went there as a seeker. He crossed the Sind, the land of the 5 rivers, and settled among the Aryans in the land of God. The text says his fame spread rapidly. Even as a teenager, his wisdom was so profound that the inhabitants of the region asked him to stay and teach them. But Jesus was on a mission. He traveled to Jagannath, to Rajgir, and finally to the holiest city of all, Benares. Here, in the heart of the Hindu world, he spent 6 years. He learned the language of the scholars, Sanskrit. He studied the Vedas, the ancient scriptures that predate the Bible by thousands of years. He learned the art of healing. He learned the mastery of the body and the spirit. He learned how to cast out spirits, a skill that would define his later ministry in Galilee. But Jesus was not just a passive student, he was a revolutionary. The society he found in India was strictly divided. It was ruled by the caste system. At the top were the Brahmins, the priests, and the Kshatriyas, the warriors. They held all the power, all the wealth, and all the knowledge. At the bottom were the Sudras, the laborers, the untouchables. They were treated as less than human, forbidden from hearing the holy words, forbidden from looking at the face of God. The Brahmin priests tried to teach Jesus their law. They told him that the Vedas were only for the elite. They told him that the Sudras were born to be slaves, and that God had ordained their suffering. Jesus rejected this. Just as he would later overturn the tables of the money changers in Jerusalem, he overturned the spiritual tables of India. The scrolls record his fierce rebuke of the Brahmin priests. He preached against the idols of stone. He preached against the blood sacrifices, and most dangerously of all, he preached against the caste system. He declared, God the Father makes no difference between his children. All are equally dear to him. He began to teach the Sudras. He ate with the untouchables. He healed the lowest of the low. He told them that God was not the property of the priests. He told them that the divine spirit lived inside every human being, regardless of their birth. This was heresy. The white-robed priests of India were furious. They saw this young Jewish prophet as a threat to their power, a threat to their control. They plotted to assassinate him. But the common people, the Sudras whom he loved, warned him of the plot. Under the cover of night, Jesus had to flee. He left the cities of the plains. He left the rigid priestly hierarchy of India behind. He climbed higher, into the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas, into the land of Nepal and Tibet. He went to find the teachers who did not believe in castes. He went to find the Buddhists. And it was there, in the high mountains, that he would learn the final secrets of the mind, the secrets that would sound almost identical to the Sermon on the Mount. Fleeing the wrath of the Hindu priests in the plains of India, the young Jesus, known as Issa, climbed higher. He crossed the mountains into the land of Nepal and Tibet. Here, among the snow-capped peaks and the prayer flags fluttering in the wind, he found a sanctuary. He found the monasteries of the Buddhists. And it was here, according to the ancient scrolls, that Jesus found the missing piece of his theology. In India, he had learned about the spirit, Brahman. But in Tibet, he learned about compassion. For centuries, Christians have believed that the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous speech Jesus ever gave, was a unique divine revelation. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Blessed are the peacemakers. These ideas were radical. They were completely alien to the Roman world of might makes right and the Jewish world of an eye for an eye. Where did they come from? When you open the ancient Buddhist texts, the Pali Canon, written 500 years before Jesus was born, you find the answer, and it is undeniable. Buddha said, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. Jesus said, love your enemies, bless them that curse you. Buddha said, victory breeds hatred, for the conquered is unhappy. Jesus said, all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Buddha taught the eightfold path of right living. Jesus taught the Beatitudes. This is not a coincidence. This is a curriculum. The scrolls of Hemis describe Issa spending 6 years in these monasteries. He learned the language of Pali. He studied the sutras. He mastered the art of meditation. He learned how to detach his mind from the suffering of the body. But the most profound concept he absorbed was the idea of the bodhisattva. In Buddhism, A bodhisattva is an enlightened being who could enter nirvana and leave this world of suffering, but chooses to return. He chooses to stay in the world, to suffer with humanity, in order to help them awaken. Does that sound familiar? This is the blueprint for the Messiah. Jesus was not just fulfilling Jewish prophecy. He was fulfilling the vow of the bodhisattva. He was an enlightened soul who voluntarily returned to the darkness of the Roman Empire to show them the way of light. To the Tibetan monks who knew him, Issa was not a god to be worshipped. He was a saint, a Buddha of compassion. They did not see him as the founder of a new religion. They saw him as a perfect student of the universal truth. This is the secret that the Vatican fears most. If Jesus was a student of Buddha, then Christianity is not the only way. It is a branch of a much older tree. It means that the wisdom of God is universal, not the property of a single church in Rome. If the world knew that the Sermon on the Mount was essentially a Buddhist sermon, the walls of division between East and West would crumble. The church would lose its claim to exclusive truth. So, they erased the years in Tibet. They turned Jesus into a Western icon. They stripped him of his Eastern robes and put him in Roman sandals. But Jesus was not done learning. He had mastered the spirit in India. He had mastered the mind in Tibet. Now, he needed to master power. And for that, he had to go to the land of the pyramids. He had to go to Egypt. The mountains of India gave Jesus wisdom. The monasteries of Tibet gave him compassion. But it was the temples of Egypt that gave him power. According to the ancient esoteric traditions, after mastering the teachings of the East, Jesus did not return directly home. He traveled west to the cradle of civilization, to the land where his ancestors had once been slaves. He went to Egypt. The Bible admits that Jesus was in Egypt as a baby, but it implies he returned to Israel as a child. However, other ancient texts tell a different story. They say he returned to Egypt as a young man, and he went there for one specific reason: to enter the great mystery schools. In the ancient world, Egypt was the center of high magic. It was the home of the Therapeutae, a secret sect of healers who could cure diseases with a touch. It was the land of the priests of Isis and Osiris, who held the secrets of life and death. The institutional church has always tried to distance Jesus from magic. They call his works miracles, proof of his unique divinity. But the enemies of the early church told a very different version of events. The Talmud, the ancient text of Rabbinic Judaism, actually mentions Jesus, but it does not call him the Son of God. It calls him Yeshu HaNatzri, and it accuses him of being a sorcerer. The Talmud claims that Jesus went to Egypt and learned magic spells. It says he scratched these spells into his skin to smuggle them out of Egypt, because the priests forbade anyone from writing them down. It says he led Israel astray with his magic. The Greek philosopher Celsus, writing in the 2nd century, made the same claim. He wrote that Jesus hired himself out as a servant in Egypt, and having there acquired some miraculous powers, he proclaimed himself a god. Why are these accusations important? Because they confirm the geography. Even his enemies admitted he was in Egypt, and he came back with supernatural powers. This changes how we view the miracles of the New Testament: turning water into wine, healing the blind, raising the dead. What if these were not random acts of God? What if they were the practiced, mastered skills of an Egyptian adept? The concept of resurrection, a god dying and rising again, was the central mystery of the Egyptian religion. The cult of Osiris, thousands of years before Christianity, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was not just a tomb. In the mystery schools, it was an initiation chamber. The candidate would be placed in the sarcophagus, put into a death-like trance for 3 days, and then raised again as an illuminated one. Did Jesus undergo this initiation? Is that where he learned the secrets of life and death that he would later demonstrate on the cross? Jesus wasn't just a rabbi. He was a mage, a master of the energetic laws of the universe. He learned that mind over matter is not a metaphor, it is a physics. This explains why he could say to his disciples, "Greater works than these shall you do." If his power came solely because he was the unique Son of God, then we cannot do what he did. But if his power came from knowledge from the Gnosis and the techniques he learned in the mystery schools, then it is a skill that can be taught. This terrified the Roman Church. They wanted a savior you had to worship. They did not want a master who taught you how to become powerful yourself. So, they erased the Egyptian years. They branded magic as demonic. And they turned the science of the soul into a mystery of faith. But India and Egypt were not the only stops on this forbidden journey. There is one more legend, perhaps the most surprising of all. A legend that says the young Jesus traveled to the mist-covered islands of the far north, to Britain. For 1,400 years, the lie of Pope Gregory defined Mary Magdalene in the West. She was the harlot, the penitent, the symbol of female sin. Her true identity as apostle, teacher, and visionary was erased by Rome. But as we have seen in our previous investigations, Rome's censorship was not absolute. There was one place, one ancient Christian civilization, that was untouched by the Vatican's reach. One kingdom that never accepted the Pope's authority: Ethiopia. In the sacred highlands of East Africa, a different Christianity survived. An older, more mystical, more complete version of the faith. And in their Bible, in their traditions, Mary Magdalene was never a prostitute. This is the restoration of her memory. While Rome was demoting her, Ethiopia was exalting her. According to the Ethiopian Synaxarion, their official book of saints, Mary Magdalene was not a passive figure. After the resurrection, she was a missionary. And where did she travel? Their texts claim she traveled to Ethiopia itself. They believe she was one of the first apostles to bring the Gnosis, the light, to Africa. This is why, in their sacred art, she is depicted in a way that would be blasphemous to Rome. Western art, from the Renaissance, paints her as a weeping, barefoot, half-naked sinner holding a jar of perfume. Ethiopian icons paint her as a queen. She stands tall, she wears regal garments, and in her hands, she holds not perfume, but a cross and a scroll, the symbols of authority and teaching. The Ethiopians, isolated from Roman politics, had preserved the original memory, the memory of Mary the teacher, the memory of Mary the visionary, the memory of Mary the apostle. In Ge'ez manuscripts, she is called the light-bearer of the apostles. In some traditions, she is even called Mary the wise. They never bought the harlot story. They never participated in the cover-up. They just kept the truth. This is the final, devastating proof. Two ancient Christian traditions. One, Gnostic, buried in Egypt. The other, Orthodox, preserved in Ethiopia. Both agree that Mary Magdalene was a powerful, authoritative Gnostic teacher. And both were declared heretical or forgotten by the one institutional power that had the most to lose from that truth: Rome. The 18 missing years of Jesus are not just a biographical gap, they are a crime scene. When you look at the Bible, you are looking at a curated, edited, and censored document. The men who assembled it in the 4th century, under the orders of the Roman emperor, did not want you to see the full picture. They wanted to present a Jesus who was born perfect, who lived in a vacuum, and who received all his wisdom directly from the sky. But if the ancient scrolls of Tibet, the legends of India, and the accusations of the Talmud are true, then the real Jesus was something far more dangerous to their authority. He was a scholar, he was a student, he was an initiate. Why is this so terrifying to the Vatican? Why have they spent 2,000 years denying and mocking the idea that Jesus traveled to the East? Because if Jesus learned his wisdom, then his wisdom is not a miracle, it is a method. If Jesus had to study, meditate, and practice to become the Christ, it implies that Christhood is not just a divine gift, but a spiritual attainment. And if he could attain it, then perhaps so can we. This destroys the entire business model of the institutional church. The church sells salvation through worship, But the Eastern Jesus taught liberation through practice. If Jesus learned his power from the Buddhists and the Brahmins and the Egyptian priests, then Christianity loses its claim to be the only way. It becomes a synthesis, a beautiful, universal bridge between all the great traditions of the world. It means that Buddha was right. It means the Vedas were right. And the Roman Church, which claims to have the monopoly on God, cannot allow that to be true. There is a specific doctrine that the Church had to crush to keep this secret, the doctrine of reincarnation. In the East, in India and Tibet, reincarnation is a fact of life. The soul journeys through many lives, learning and growing until it reaches enlightenment. Many scholars believe the early Christians, influenced by Jesus' Eastern teachings, also believed in the pre-existence of the soul. But in the year 553 AD, at the Second Council of Constantinople, the Church formally cursed and banned the teaching of reincarnation. Why? Because if you have 1,000 lives to save your soul, you do not need the Church right now. You do not need to fear an eternal hell. You have time. Reincarnation destroys the weapon of fear. So, they removed it. They removed the Eastern philosophy. They removed the Egyptian magic. They removed the lost years. They stripped Jesus of his robes, of a universal master, and dressed him in the clothes of a Jewish Messiah who fit their narrow narrative. They created a Jesus who demands to be worshipped, rather than a Jesus who invites you to follow his path of inner awakening. They turned the way into a religion. But the truth cannot be burned. It cannot be buried in the Vatican archives forever. The scrolls of Hemis survived. The traditions of Glastonbury survived. The Gnostic Gospels survived. And now, in our time, the picture is finally coming together. The Jesus who emerges from the lost years is not less divine, he is more magnificent. He is a man who walked the whole earth to find the truth, who unified the wisdom of all nations, and who brought the fire of the East to the darkness of the West. He was not just the king of the Jews, he was the first citizen of the world. And now that we know where he went and what he learned, we must ask the final question: what does this mean for us? If the lost years are actually the found years of our own spiritual heritage, what are we supposed to do with this knowledge? At the age of 29, the traveler returned. After 18 years of wandering the deserts of Egypt, the mountains of India, and the snows of Tibet, Jesus walked back into the dusty village of Nazareth. He left as a boy. He returned as a master. He did not come back as a simple Jewish carpenter who had been quietly building chairs for 2 decades. He came back as a citizen of the world, a man who carried the wisdom of the Vedas, the compassion of the Buddha, and the power of the Egyptian initiates in his very soul. When he stood up to preach in the synagogue, the people were astonished. They asked, "Where did this man get this wisdom? Is this not the carpenter's son?" The Bible records their confusion, but it hides the answer. He got this wisdom because he had walked the path. He had sought the truth at its source, wherever it was found. He was not just the Messiah of the Jews, he was the universal Christ. This explains why his ministry was so explosive and why it was so short. He was trying to pour the ocean of universal truth into the tiny cup of dogmatic religion. He was trying to tell the Pharisees that God does not belong to one tribe. He was trying to tell the world that the kingdom of heaven is not a political territory, but a state of consciousness that can be achieved by anyone, anywhere. The institutional church spent 2,000 years trying to erase the footsteps of this journey. They wanted you to believe that Jesus was unique because he was God. But the lost years reveal a much more powerful truth. Jesus was unique because he was the only one brave enough to break the boundaries of his culture, to cross the mountains and the seas, and to unify the spiritual heritage of the human race. He didn't want you to worship him as an idol. He wanted you to follow him as an example. He wanted you to know that the power he had, the gnosis, the miracles, the connection to the Father, is available to you too. The works that I do shall you do also, and greater works than these shall you do. The Vatican tried to hide the student Jesus because they fear the student you. They fear a humanity that realizes we don't need to wait for a savior to drop from the sky. We need to start walking the path ourselves. But the time of secrets is over. The scrolls of the Himalayas have spoken. The legends of Britain have persisted. The accusations of the Talmud have backfired. The 18 silent years are speaking louder than ever. We are living in the time of the great unveiling. The borders are dissolving. The wisdom of the East and the West is merging once again. We are finally ready to meet the real Jesus. Not the static icon of the stained glass window, but the rugged traveler, the seeker, the master of all wisdom. So, what do you believe? Did Jesus sit in Nazareth for 18 years? Or did he walk the world to find the truth? Was his wisdom a miracle? Or was it a mastery? The choice is yours. But remember, the truth has no borders. If this investigation has opened your eyes to the hidden history of the faith, then join us. Comment below with these words: the truth has no borders. Like this video to help us spread this forbidden history to the rest of the world. And subscribe, because the library of forbidden knowledge is vast, and we have only just opened the door. In the book of Genesis, we are told that God created Adam and then Eve. But there is an ancient legend, suppressed by the church for millennia, that claims Eve was not the first woman. There was another, a woman created equal to Adam, a woman who refused to submit, a woman who was erased from the Bible and turned into a demon. Her name was Lilith. In our next investigation, we will uncover the terrifying and tragic story of Adam's first wife. I'll see you in the next investigation.